Welcome back to our January 2026 Exploring Agritourism for Your Farm webinar series. It's been a great week. We're on session 3 already and thankful that it's Friday. Today we're going to talk about regulatory considerations for agritourism enterprises. I'm Megan Leffew again from the Center for Profitable Agriculture here as part of UT Extension and a partnership with the University of Tennessee and the Tennessee Farm Bureau. I am very pleased that Kortni Blalock, one of our newest staff members here at the center, who's also an extension specialist, will be joining us in this presentation. She's going to touch on some business license and sales tax regulations a little bit later, so I'm really excited for you all to get to know her. I was also going to check to see, and she is here. Casey Troop is on with us as well. Casey, if you are where you can turn your video on, and many folks will know Casey. She is with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. She's the business consultant for agritourism and several other things. So Casey will be joining us again on Monday and doing some teaching for us, and we'll be team teaching with me at the Pick Tennessee conference as well. She couldn't join us before this week because she had some other events going on, and she's super busy. So we appreciate you joining us, Casey, and we'll ask you to weigh in on these regulatory considerations as we go through, because I know you have a lot of great experience and knowledge on these topics as well.
Yes, thanks, Megan. I'm glad I get to join y'all today, and sorry I couldn't be with y'all for the first few sessions. But like Megan mentioned, I'll be speaking on Monday's session, so please be sure to join us again Monday to hear all about the different resources that my group and other state agencies have available for y'all. And then I'll be here today to help answer any questions as needed.
Wonderful. We really appreciate that. Regulations are a doozy sometimes, so there's lots of aspects of those, and we need all the help we can get here. So as we dive in today, I want to give you a little bit of context about our presentation today. We could probably speak for a week straight about regulations and dig into the details of each regulation. So today, in this next hour and a half, we're going to present some basic information about regulations that we want you to be aware of, but we don't have time to get into all the details of those. So we want to make you aware of regulations and give you some resources about where you could find more information or work with us to find more information about the ones that apply to you. And again, this information is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. We are educators. We are not regulators or attorneys or medical professionals or anything like that. So we do our best to provide accurate information to you. When we talked about agritourism earlier in the week and all the diverse types of attractions and products and services and experiences that can be offered, it's really hard to boil agritourism down into a nice little package. And that extends to the regulations as well. So in the beginning, we talked about one of the key steps to exploring, analyzing, and developing an enterprise is to investigate the regulations. Some of the regulations are going to be very specific to a certain thing that you're offering, experience or service or product that you're offering. And some regulations are going to apply more broadly to most agritourism operations. But you can see here, this is a long list of regulations that is only a partial list of the ones we're aware of. And sometimes we're aware of a regulation and it may be applied in a different way. Casey and I learned something this summer that we weren't aware of being related to agritourism. So there is a lot to deal with this. So we are going to work toward these objectives today. We're going to try to increase your awareness of regulations that impact agritourism operation and provide more resources, including Kortni and Casey and I, and others on our teams to help find out the details that you need in order to operate successfully under these regulations. And we don't want anybody to get into any hot water, right? There are a couple of key concepts that I do want to mention before we dive into some specific regulations. A lot of times, Casey and I will get calls or emails, and they will say, what do I need to do to be considered agritourism? Or is this specific activity or service or experience on a farm or on land considered agritourism? Well, that's really a difficult spot for us because there is no special license or agency that you go to say, I'm doing this, and they give you a stamp of approval that says this is agritourism in Tennessee. And actually, agritourism in Tennessee doesn't really have much legal standing, just the term, if you were to be stamped, approved as agritourism somewhere. So that's something to think about as well. It's not some magic key that opens a lot of doors. The other concept that I want you to remember is being considered agritourism or even meeting the definition of agriculture in our state statute does not exempt you from adhering to regulations. Okay, it is not a get out of free jail card, get out of jail free card, or allowing you to bypass other regulations. So those are some things that we really want to think about. Now, I think being agriculture and agritourism opens some doors as far as the Tennessee Agricultural Enhancement Program that I know Casey will mention next time, and some other maybe resources available, but it does not exempt you from following the rules and laws or providing a safe experience, if that makes sense. So as we dive deeper into this presentation, we're going to try to cover several specific topics related to regulations. And you can see why we can only kind of touch on these, but we do want to try to touch on things that we've realized people don't know or understand that really impacts how they develop their business plan and how they operate their business, and things that we've learned over time that may have surprised us. So we're going to talk about agritourism and Tennessee's definition of agriculture, business licenses, sales tax, a little about building codes and state fire marshal, labor laws, Americans with Disabilities Act, food service, amusement devices, and animal exhibitor licenses. And remember, this is only a small piece of the larger list that is not an all-inclusive list that I mentioned before. So regulations are a big part of getting your agritourism operation up and going, and as you expand and grow as well. I'm watching the chat in case you have any questions or comments or suggestions in there as well. So every once in a while, I'll pause and just check that out. So forgive me for doing that. So let's start with looking at Tennessee's definition of agriculture and how agritourism fits into that and what that might mean. As we do that, I want to mention three kind of main issues that occur in agritourism that are impacted by this definition of agriculture that we'll talk about. The first is property use and also related to zoning. So are the activities, products, services, experiences that you want to offer on your farm or your land, are they applicable under its current zoning? Nuisance is another thing that we've had come up. Are the activities conducted a nuisance as defined by Tennessee law? And taxation. Should land used for those activities be classified as agricultural or commercial for a property tax? And all of these things have created some challenges, we'll say, for enterprise operators in Tennessee in the form of lawsuits from neighbors, from their counties, or from the State Board of Equalization. So we're hoping the relatively new definition of agriculture will help with some of that, but there are also some gray areas in there that leave some room for courts to decide what that definition actually means. So the laws that are pertinent to those issues include the definition of agriculture, the Tennessee Right to Farm Law, and rules of the State Board of Equalization. And the second two are impacted by the first one. So let's look at the definition of agriculture here for the state of Tennessee. Agriculture means the land, buildings, and machinery used in the commercial production of farm and nursery stock. It means the activity carried on in connection with the commercial production of farm and products and nursery stock. And then we get into some terminology that relates to agritourism without using the term or the word agritourism. So the definition of agriculture in Tennessee includes recreational and educational activities on land used for the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock, and entertainment activities conducted in conjunction with, but secondary to, commercial production of farm and nursery stock. So we've got recreation and educational activities, and then entertainment activities as long as they're secondary to the commercial production of farm and nursery stock. The definition, not going to read this, also includes a definition of the term farm products and the term nursery stock to clarify as well. So that's the definition of agriculture that includes some terminology related to agritourism type activities. The Tennessee Right to Farm Act says that a farm or farm operation is not a public or private nuisance. And so definitions or agritourism operations that meet the definition of agriculture, the Tennessee Right to Farm Act applies to as well. I've got a question here, I think. How is secondary determined? Sarah, that's an excellent question. A question that we ask ourselves often, and the courts have helped decide, which will be a wonderful segue to some case law I'm going to mention in a minute. That's perfect. The rules of the Tennessee State Board of Equalization relate to property taxation. And if a property is considered farm and agriculture, that it's valued at agricultural rate and taxed at an agricultural rate. If it's not considered agriculture, or a portion of that land is not considered agriculture, it can be considered commercial and would be taxed at a commercial value and at a commercial rate. So that certainly impacts the bottom line and the costs associated with doing business. In Tennessee, one piece of property can be used for more than one purpose and can be subclassified and assessed different percentages for each use. And so some of those things that might be considered agritourism activities could actually be assessed at a commercial rate because, again, agritourism is really broad, but our definition of agriculture is really slim. There are also some specifics in the State Board of Equalization rules that say, that's related to farming, but it does not include things like short-term rentals. So a short-term rental would be allowed to be subclassified and assessed at a commercial rate, even if it's on a farm. So there are some of those specific details um, that need to be considered in these rules. There have been several cases that have gone to court related to the definition of agriculture, the right to farm law, and the state board of equalization. And some of these give some cues as to what is considered entertainment and what secondary to means. So, in one case, one lesson learned is that agritourism activities fall within the scope of the right to farm laws if they meet the definition of agriculture right and are protected against nuisance claims. Within that, entertainment and some examples given in the judgment here were amplified music concerts and weddings and events. So those things are considered in that entertainment rather than the education and recreation category and are must be conducted in conjunction with but secondary to that commercial production of farm and nursery stock. The next lessons we've learned for some different cases is that there are a variety of factors used to determine whether those entertainment activities are secondary to the commercial production of farm and nursery stock, including the time and effort spent on each of those activities. So the time and effort spent on the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock versus the time and effort spent on hosting concerts or weddings. And the other aspect was income generated by each of those aspects. And the door was left open to there may be other factors of that, perhaps the amount of space used or other things there that can be argued to show that a particular enterprise or activity was secondary, that commercial production of farm and nursery stock. We've also learned from cases that, one size doesn't fit all. One situation may be different from another. So the definition of agriculture, how that's applied, will depend specifically on the facts of each situation and may be reviewed again as situations evolve. So if there's a question as to whether perhaps an operation that offers weddings and does some agriculture, um, are the weddings secondary too? Well, it might depend on how many weddings they offer. How much of the year do those weddings or how many days do the weddings occur, and how much agriculture is actually the commercial production of farm and nursery products is actually accomplished. So if you did two weddings and had, a cow and some chickens, it might be secondary too. But if you do 50 weddings and you have a few chickens and a cow, that the scale may be tilted there. So really the facts of the case of each situation determine how the definition of agriculture is applied. We've had some other cases that say we had a government entity say, well, you're not a farm because you don't have 15 acres. Well, from that case, we learned that a farm doesn't have to be 15 acres and an agritourism operation doesn't have to be 15 acres to be considered farm property or to be considered agriculture. So smaller operations, we know you can grow a whole lot of berries on a very small amount of land. You don't need 15 acres all the time to have a farm or an agritourism operation. The other lesson was that property may be subclassified for property tax purposes. So a portion of an agritourism operation that meets the legal definition of agriculture must be classified as agriculture for tax purposes, as farm property. But then there may be a split classification if there's a non-qualifying portion of the property. Um, Perhaps somebody has a hair salon or is doing a whole lot of weddings or manufacturing even a farm product, but it's not it's not their from farm product. So we can split classification. It's not a one size fits all there. We do have a publication that goes more into depth on the definition of agriculture, the actual cases that those lessons learned came from, and a little bit more into those lessons learned. I was really thankful Kevin Hensley, who's with the policy development team at the Tennessee Farm Bureau, was a co-author on this publication and really is really knowledgeable about these efforts and helpful in um, finding good results for farmers related to this. So we want to shout out to him. At this time, I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to Kortni to talk about business licenses and sales tax. And while we're doing that, I will also check the chat to see if there's anything else going on.
Alrighty, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You look and sound perfect. Thanks, Courtney.
All right, thank you so much. So, hi everyone, my name is Courtney Blalock, and I'm an extension specialist here at the Center for Profitable Agriculture. I'm very excited to be participating in this meeting and to help share information about business licenses and sales tax. It can be really difficult to understand at times and a lot of information, but I hope this presentation clears up some of the confusion. So a little bit about me. So I am originally from Georgia, and I got my bachelor's degree in agribusiness from North Carolina A&T State University. And then in May of 2025, I graduated with my master's in agricultural and resource economics from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And so again, I'm here with the Center for Profitable Agriculture, which is a collaboration between the University of Tennessee Extension and Tennessee Farm Bureau. So again, like Megan said, a quick disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice, nor is it intended to be a substitute for the services of a competent legal professional. So I definitely recommend reaching out to tax professionals and the Tennessee Department of Revenue. This is just a basic overview of business licenses and sales tax. So just going over some session objectives. So these are for farmers and others in the agricultural field who are engaged in direct marketing, value-added agriculture, and agritourism. And again, this is to help make complex, confusing, and unique farmer situations more straightforward. So quick overview, going to go over the purpose. Then we have BLAST questions, which stands for business licenses and sales tax. So those are going to be peppered throughout the presentation to bring more context to the information. Then I'll go over business licenses, business tax, sales tax, and work questions at the end or throughout the presentation as well. So then it's very important for farmers to understand if and when they need a business license, how sales tax applies to them, any potential exemptions, the appropriate certificates, and additional resources. So getting right into it, business licenses are a legal document that allows a business to operate in a specific geographic location. So businesses are required to have a license, must obtain a license from each county and municipality if required by the city. So let's say you have a store in Nashville, you would need a business license for Nashville and a business license for Davidson County. But let's say you want to open like the same business, but a second store, let's say in Columbia, you would then need another business license for Columbia, Tennessee. So it's not just under the branch of the business name, it's based on location. And then all 95 counties require business licenses. And so a license is required for any business who has a profit of gross annual sales of more than $3,000 in a business location. Your fiscal year end of year is the same as the end of year for the IRS, which is normally in December. And then a business only needs a business license if it's in a permanent business location, and permanent can be seen as more than 6 months. So if you're at a temporary location for farmers markets and festivals, I believe you would need another type of license, but in terms of a business license, we're looking at more permanent business locations. And then looking at the two types of business license. So you have the minimal activity business license and then the standard business license. So when it comes to the minimal activity license, that's when your gross annual sales are over $3,000, but less than $100,000. And so throughout this entire presentation, we're going to see kind of these thresholds over and over again. And then it'll be $15 per location and no business tax is paid. However, when we look to the standard business license, we see you need a standard business license when you have gross annual sales of $100,000 or more. It's still 15 per location, but this time business tax is paid. So now we're kind of looking into the exemptions of needing a business license or paying business tax. So you do not need a business license or business tax for a farm sale of its own raised products. So if you grow something, sell it, then you do not need a business license or to pay business tax. This is the same that you don't need a business license or business tax if for a farm sale of value-added products where the only ingredients or the only non-raised ingredients are right here to the right. So water, sugar, pectin, salt, and preservatives. So if you grew some berries and wanted to make jam and they only contained water, sugar, pectin, salt, or preservatives, then no business license or no business tax is needed. And then lastly, you also do not require a business license or a business tax for a farm sale of admissions for tours for activities that are purely educational in nature. So purely educational, no amusement of any kind. So that's just like a farm tour. So coming through, if a group comes through and wants to learn more about farming. So looking more into the split between educational and non-educational, and Megan can hop in if necessary. But when it comes to educational, it needs to be like clearly educational. And then your admission sales are not subject to the business license or business tax. However, non-educational talks about so amusement, recreation, entertainment. So that could be a hayride. Let's say you have a really fun slide, or if you have a carousel, things of that nature would be non-educational. And so as we move forward, it's going to mainly be these three pillars that we're looking at. So farm products, value-added ingredients, and agritourism. So when we look here, if your farm products are raised or you have value-added ingredients that only have those five non-raised ingredients, or your agritourism is educational with no limit on annual sales, then you don't need a business license or to pay business tax. However, we're also looking at if your farm products are purchased or your value-added products have more than five of those five ingredients, or your agritourism is non-educational. But if your total annual sales are $3,000 or less, then you still do not need a business license or business tax. And so that's the main threshold that we're looking at, one of the main thresholds. And we can see here again, though, if your total annual sales are greater than $3,000, but less than $100,000, then all you need is the minimal activity business license, and you will not pay business tax. And then the last threshold is that if total annual sales are $100,000 or more, that's when you need the standard activity business license, and you will have to pay business tax as well. And so looking here, this is definitely where I would take a photo because it kind of summarizes it all, summarizes all those slides kind of in just one big slide showing the farm sales categories again for a farmer's raised products, value-added products with its raised products, and only containing salt, water, sugar, pectin, and preservatives, and then agritourism that's purely educational, no minimum activity license required, no standard, and no need to pay business tax. And then we can see here the thresholds once again of you need to have a minimal activity license if it's between 3,000, if it's more than $3,000 and less than $100,000. And then yes, if your annual sales are $100,000 or more, you will need to have a standard business license and pay business tax. And so here we're also just looking at a quick example, one of the questions. So farmer Sophie raises pumpkins and makes pumpkin pies in her commercial kitchen on the farm. Sophie's annual pumpkin pie sales totals $33,500. She uses the pumpkin she raised and eggs from her chickens, plus pastry, pumpkin pie spice, and sugar to make the pies. Does she need a business license or to pay business tax? So we can see that she raised her own pumpkins and that her pie sales are 3,500. But we also see that she included pastry, pumpkin pie, spice, and sugar. So she's going to need a minimum activity business license, but not to pay business tax. Additionally, she's over that $3,000 threshold to fall in between the 3,000 and the 100,000. So looking more into business tax is defined as a privileged tax that permits one to engage in the business of selling tangible personal property at wholesale or retail and rendering certain services. And then whenever a business has gross annual sales of $100,000 or more, you will have to pay business tax. So business tax depends on 5 different classifications and subclassifications. The dominant business activity determines your classification. And then you're also going to vary depending on whether your sales are wholesale or retail. And then the minimum tax is $22 per business. So here's just a shortened kind of condensed list that I got from the Tennessee Department of Revenue to explain some of the classifications, what they're for, their descriptions, and then we can see the difference in their retail tax rate and then their wholesale tax rate. Mainly, we're going to focus on Class 1A, which is for food and beer. For home consumption, we see that the retail tax rate is 0.001, the wholesale tax rate is 0.00025. But we can see in the other descriptions, some are for farm, nursery, and related, some are for restaurants, some down there are for pet food and candy. And so you'll be able to go through and look to see where you fall within the classifications. Determining the difference between a retailer and wholesaler. A retailer is when annual sales are at least 50% of the taxable gross sales are retail. So a wholesaler is when 50% of the gross sales are for wholesale. So here we have an example of farmer Isabella. She sold cheese for the year. We can see that in the dark blue, that is her retail sales, which are $40,000. And then we can see in the lighter blue, her wholesales were $250,000. Combined, that's $290,000. So she'll have to get a standard business license and pay business tax. We also see that her dominant business activity is the sale of cheese, which falls into the Class 1A classification. So she's also considered a wholesaler because more than 50% of her sales come from her wholesales. So we take her total profit, multiply it by her business tax rate, and then we see the business tax that she'll need to pay is $72.50. So when are business taxes due? So they are due on the 15th day of the fourth month following the end of the business's fiscal year. So if it were to coincide exactly with the calendar year, then the return will be due on April 15th. But let's say, for example, a business has a fiscal year that ends on June 30th, then their taxes will be due on October 15th. And then how is business tax paid? So businesses must file a business tax return and pay electronically through the Tennessee Department of Revenue using the Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point. So we can see here is just a clip of the website. You're able to log in, and down there we can see you can make payments, returns, and other registrations. Alrighty, so let's now get into sales tax. So, directly from the Tennessee Department of Revenue, sales and use taxes are transactional taxes applied to the sale or use of tangible personal property or specific services in Tennessee. So, they generally apply to the retail sales of any business, organization, or person engaged in making retail sales. So I made this chart to kind of get a better understanding in terms of when to combine sales tax rates. So a little later on down in the presentation, we'll talk about if you're exempt from sales tax. But for this sake, let's say we are collecting sales tax. We now have to pay a local rate, which is between 2.25% and 2.75%. And that just depends on your location, the business's location. And so then it can be divided once again into if what you're trying to put sales tax on, is this a food or food ingredient? If it is a food ingredient, then food in Tennessee only has a 4% tax rate, meaning that the highest combined rate will only be 6.75%. Whereas if it's not considered a food or food ingredient, then you're going to pay the collect the state rate, which is 7%. And the highest combined rate for that will be 9.75%. So we're going to look at some of the exemptions. So again, if the farmer raised the product, then they are exempt from sales tax. And this also requires no paperwork, no registration, or there's no approval needed. But in terms of record keeping, you should be able to produce proof that the products meet the criteria. And then there's also, again, no annual sales limit. So looking here, we have what is kind of called the 50% exemption. So we see that if a farmer purchases farm products for sale, we have the dark blue is the farm raised, and then the light blue is the purchase. So if in a total year, if your farm raised sales exceed 50% of total annual sales, then you do not have to collect sales tax at all. However, if your purchase products that you sell exceed 50% of the total annual sales, then you need to collect sales tax only on the purchase products. Farm raised products will always be sales tax free. But if your purchase products exceed 50% of total annual sales in a year, you have to collect the sales tax on the purchase only. So let's look at an example. In the same calendar year, Farmer Greg raises and sells lemons for $8,000. He also sells lemons to consumers for $10,000 that were bought for resale from the farmer who raised them. Farmer Greg's lemon sales total $18,000. Does sales tax need to be collected? So we can look and see that he does raise and sell lemons, but he also bought some from resale for the farmer who raised them. When we look at the pie chart here, we see that the raised lemons are 44% of his total annual sales, and the purchased lemons are 56% of his total annual sale. And so because it's greater than the 50% threshold, he's going to need to collect sales tax only on the purchased lemons, not on the ones he raised, only on this purchase limits. And then looking back once more, just coming back to the combined sales tax rate, looking at the local rate being between 2.25% and 2.75%, and then the food rate is 4%. So here we have another example of Farmer A who lives in Lebanon and just sold $100 worth of taxable food products. And so the local food tax there is 2.75%, and then the state food tax is 4%. How much will a consumer pay with taxes? So if we combine in decimal form, if we combine the 0.0275 and 0.04, we have a combined tax of 0.0675. Take the original food sale, multiply it to the combined tax to get the total tax, which is going to be $6.75. We then take the original food sale again and add it to the total tax. So the final sale is going to be 106.75. And then here at the bottom, just a chart to see that the local sales tax is kind of that middle blue color, and the state food tax is added on as well. And so hopefully this hasn't been too confusing, but there are some more sales tax exemptions. So a farmer or a business is not required to have sales tax or collect sales tax if these two statements below are true. So if annual gross sales are $4,800 or less and taxable services above $1,200 per year, and if the seller pays Tennessee sales tax to his suppliers. So it has to be both of those statements. So annual gross sales need to be 4,800 or less, and the seller needs to pay Tennessee sales tax to its suppliers. So here we have an example. So Farmer Manny raises and sells oranges for $3,000, and the oranges he purchased from another farmer sold to consumers for $4,000. He paid sales tax to the supplier, and total sales are $7,000. Does sales tax need to be collected? So we see that he did raise oranges, but he also purchased oranges from another farmer who sold them for $4,000. And we can see that in his pie chart, we see that his purchased oranges at 57% exceed his range oranges in terms of total annual sales. So we would automatically think that Farmer Manny is going to need to collect sales tax from his purchased oranges. However, because he paid sales tax to the supplier and because his purchase sales were less than $4,800, then no, he will not need to collect sales tax on the purchased oranges. We also have another example of Farmer Daisy. Farmer Daisy grows pumpkins on her farm. She starts 2 agritourism ventures, offering a hayride through the pumpkin patch and allowing consumers to pick their own pumpkin. If she charges an $8 admission per person for the hayride and 1 pumpkin, does she need to collect sales tax? So we see that she does grow her own pumpkins. And she has 2 agritourism ventures, being a hayride and then getting the pumpkin. But she is going to need to collect sales tax because it's 1 admission ticket. And so the agritourism activity and the farm-raised product are combined. So she has another option here. So we can see that Farmer Daisy, she took the farm-raised product and the non-educational farm activity and collected sales tax from the entire admission ticket. However, she also has the choice to have separate tickets, one for her farm-raised products, where she will collect no sales tax, and then for her non-educational farm activity, she would collect sales tax on that. And so this is up to basically each person's preferences. It's all based on record keeping. If you want to have 2 different admission tickets, it's based on what you prefer. And so then we also have the applications for sales tax registration. And so you would apply on the Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point once again. And so once you apply, you will receive a certificate of registration. And from that, you will automatically receive a certificate for resale. So this resale certification is to purchase items for resale without paying sales tax by providing a copy of the certificate. You also have the choice to also apply for the agricultural sales and use tax certificate of exemption. So this exemption is not for purchasing products, but it can be used to purchase containers, lids, labels, and things of that nature for value-added products. And so basically going into a summary, once again, if you have the farmer raised products, those five exempt ingredients of, and then the educational agritourism, again, at any annual sales, you do not need a business license or a business tax. If you have purchased products or you use in your value added product, you use more than those five exempt ingredients, or have a non-educational agritourism, but your annual sales are $3,000 or less, you still do not need a business license or business tax. If your annual sales become more than $3,000 and less than $100,000, you need a minimal activity business license, but you still do not have to pay business tax. And then if your annual sales are $100,000 or more, then you need a standard business license and you will have to pay business tax. When it comes to the sales tax, if you have the farmer raised products or the five exempt ingredients or have an educational agritourism at any sales, then you do not have to pay sales tax or collect sales tax. And then for all other products, if you are at $4,800 or less and you pay sales tax on your purchases, then you do not have to collect sales tax. However, if you're over the 4,800 threshold, then you will have to collect sales tax. And so here are some of the sources. All this information is from the Tennessee Department of Revenue. I recommend going to the website. First up here is the Tennessee Agricultural Tax Manual. It's this huge manual. It has really great information in it. I definitely recommend it. And then again, because the local sales tax rate is different all over Tennessee, that's a great resource. Also, when it comes to the exemption certificates and credits, that's a great resource as well. And then lastly, sales tax on the food and food ingredients. It's really important to go to that one to see what's classified as food for the 4% and what's not. And then again, I recommend reaching out to the Tennessee Department of Revenue. So that's their email, revenuesupport@tn.gov. That's their website, and then that's their phone as well. And then that's the end of it for me. If anyone has any questions, please, I will try my best to answer them. But here's my email right here. And then I also have the direct line to my office. But please reach out if you have any questions. This is a lot of information, so feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Kortni. It can be very confusing, and there are a lot of it depends. How much of each are you doing? What's in it? How are you selling it? Who are you selling it to? So I do encourage you reach out to Kortni, reach out to the Department of Revenue. We've got a good relationship with some folks there. They're used to us emailing and calling and saying, "What about this?" We're not exactly sure. Um, so hopefully that will be great. We don't want folks to get in hot water with our friends at the Department of Revenue as well. Courtney, if you want to put any information into the chat, you can, and I would love if you would email me those links and the contact information to the Department of Revenue, and I will send that to all the participants along with the recording link either this afternoon or Monday. So.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay. We'll go back to the other slide here and dig into some more. And if you have any other questions that come up about sales tax or business license, we'll come back to those as well. I think we were able to cover all of those. Another question we get oftentimes is, well, I want to build a structure or use an existing structure on the farm for agritourism purposes. So we'll talk just briefly about some building codes, the state and state fire marshal issues. So there are some state statutes related specifically to agricultural buildings, and these really do relate to the commercial production of farm and nursery stock kind of aspect of agriculture. And in those statutes, counties can't require building permits for these ag buildings. And they can't regulate agriculture buildings. Now, we are seeing that some counties are requiring that you apply for an exemption for a building that's for agricultural purposes. And if you're doing plumbing or electrical in it, some counties are requiring plumbing and electrical inspections with that. Those buildings have to be on the appropriately zoned kind of property to be considered agricultural buildings, and that may vary a little bit about what specific county zoning is. And then setbacks apply. And setbacks are the distance that a building has to be from the edge of the property so it's not too close to your neighbor, for example. So if you're building an agricultural building, there's a lot less red tape that goes into that, but it has to be a true agriculture um, on the production side kind of building is what we're seeing. So structures with non-ag uses, even if they have some ag uses, maybe you're using something to store tractors or to store hay or something some part of the year, but maybe you host events or field trips, classes or things in those, then those may be considered non-ag uses as far as the building and codes go. And so and when I'm talking about these structures, that may even include a pavilion that's not all the way the way closed in. So then you likely need a building permit. Your building codes likely apply. And in cases where you are building something, you'll need an architect, plans for those. And then in cases where you have an expected occupancy of 300 people or more, or a certain size, then the fire marshal has to review those plans and make sure it's okay. One thing Casey and I learned this summer from an agritourism operator is that there are some regulations even for tents if they are of a large tent size, that you need to work with your county on and potentially even the state fire marshal if you own those tents, or if you're working with somebody who you're renting them from, you need to make sure that everything is okay with them on that side. So if you are looking at building or renovating a structure for use in agritourism, I encourage you to be aware of the definition of agriculture as well, but realize when you're using that for people going to be in those buildings, we have a extra layer of safety that we need to adhere to, and likely some extra requirements from your county planning office and potentially from the state fire marshal's office. Employment and labor laws is another issue we get into a lot of times. When we expand into agritourism, we need more help, and we oftentimes have to pay for that. And employment and labor laws are different for agriculture production work and for non-agriculture production work. So there are lots of laws that come into play with labor and employment. Here are a list of a few. The U.S. Fair Labor Standards Act, and there's a Migrant Labor Act as well that relates to the H-2A and H-2B kind of workers that come in. And then the states have several laws related to child labor, wage regulations, a Prevailing Wage Act, and Illegal Alien Act. That's the Tennessee Lawful Employment Act, a Non-Smoker Protection Act, and then there's workers' compensation also that comes into play. So when you're looking at hiring employees, it's really important to understand some things about employment. Are you hiring an agricultural employee or a non-agricultural employee according to the regulations, or a combination? Are you hiring an employee or are you hiring a contractor? Um, and making sure that you're following those definitions according to the state and federal labor laws. So, an agricultural employee is one who raises or harvests agricultural or horticulture products, operates, manages, conserves, improves, or maintains farm tools and equipments, handles, processes, or packages any agricultural, horticultural commodity in its unmanufactured state. So that might be just handling produce and packaging it to get out the door, but not making making a product or doing anything really special extra to it. A non-agricultural employee is anyone who's not meeting that ag definition. So anybody going beyond that. So resale activities. So the person that might work in the on-farm retail store, even if they're only selling the farm product, that's a non-ag use. Processing, so taking those strawberries and making jam, as Kortni mentioned before, that is a non-ag job. Cashiers, attraction attendants, uh, custodial, taking the trash out, food service, all of those activities would fall under the non-ag employee. For ag employees and non-ag employees, it matters because there are different regulations for each. Ag employees, their wages are reported annually to the IRS and they're given a W-2 at the end of the year. They are exempt from overtime pay for extra hours. And then there's different rules for whether you have to pay unemployment taxes and workers' compensation, I do believe. Non-ag, you report wages quarterly to the IRS and they also get a W-2, but they are eligible for overtime pay or required to get overtime pay if they work overtime. So we want to be really careful because the Department of Labor gets real cranky when we don't really specify what each employee is doing. Um, so having a job description of what they're supposed to do and what they did and what they were paid and what you reported is important. As well, sometimes you might have employees that do both. So really tracking which hour they're working as an ag employee and which hours they're working as a non-ag employee, and making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed are important. So that's a good question. Is someone hired to manage a U-pick operation an ag employee or a non-ag employee? Oh boy, I'm not sure that I know exactly the answer to that one. Um, it may depend on what their specific, job description is. I would think that that may be a non-ag employee because, an ag employee would be the person if you hired somebody to pick or care for the crops. But if you're hiring somebody to basically manage employees or be a cashier or to manage customer service and that those sorts of things, I would think that that would not be. But we can certainly check on that with the Department of Labor. Good question. Okay. So an employee versus a contractor. An employee, in the case of an employee, the employer typically controls the work. You're telling the people what to do. You're providing them often with the tools and supplies and resources to do the job. They receive a regular wage with taxes withheld. You do a W-4 upon hiring them, and they get a W-2 annually for tax reporting. And your business needs an employee identification number. If you're hiring an independent contractor is basically a self-employed business owner. So they are their business and they control what they do and when they do it and how they do it. They often provide their own tools and the materials to do the job. And it's typically like you hire somebody to do a certain job, like build something or fix something or do this and then it's over with. And independent contractors get a W-9 upon hiring and a 1099 for tax reporting services. I think sometimes operators try to make employees fit into an independent contractor role so they don't have to withhold those wages and things, but when really they're an employee. And again, the IRS and Department of Labor get a little grouchy when we're not putting employees into the right category. And this and the agricultural worker, non-ag worker can cause some kind of audit issues and fines and other things. So we want to try to make sure we get this right from the beginning. Some other things about Tennessee employment that can be helpful to know. Tennessee is an employment at will state. So my powers that be can come in here and say, I'm sorry, Megan, your services are no longer needed. And they don't have to give me a cause or any sort of heads up or anything like that. So people can hire and fire at will here. We cannot discriminate on a protected class. In Tennessee, the protected classes are an employee's race, sex, age, religion, color, national origin, or disability. And we can't fire somebody for refusing to break the law as well. So, an employee can terminate their employment any time for any reason as well. So I could just go in and say, I'm done. I'm going I'm going home or I'm going to work somewhere else. So that those are our rights for employment here as well. Child labor laws in Tennessee. Some of you may want to hire your own children or hire minors between the age of 14 to 17. Check into the rules on there because there are restrictions about what they can and cannot do, as well as how many hours they can work and some other things. So be sure to check that out. When you are hiring regular employees, in Tennessee, with the Department of Workforce Development, you've got to submit a new hire report within 20 days of the date that those folks are hired. And that's to help make sure that the employees are eligible for work in the United States and in the state. There's also an Employment Verification Act. I'm sorry. There's a new hire reporting that you have to report that they're hired within 20 days. And then employment verification is about maintaining a legal workforce. So those are two requirements. And then each employer is supposed to post employment posters in a prominent place where employees have access to those. You can obtain those for free to download and print from the Tennessee Department of Workforce Development, and I'll send the links for that as well. So that's, again, a quick and dirty aspect of related to employment. The Americans with Disability Act has several things that we need to comply with as businesses that are open to the public. So this is a federal law that prevents discrimination or on the basis of disability. Some disabilities are easy to tell that somebody is disabled, and other things we may not be able to see. And so we can't just assume that somebody doesn't appear to have a disability really doesn't. So this law says that people with disability have to have the same opportunities as everyone else, including to purchase goods and services. So if you are open to the public, you must comply with the ADA. And there's 5 different sections within the ADA. Title 3 relates to businesses. There are some expectations that are different for small businesses versus large businesses as well. So that's important to make sure when you're looking into this that you're looking about what's required to the small business if you fit in that category or a large business. So part of the ADA Title III is that businesses must make public accommodations. So part of what that means is to remove architectural barriers that exist when it's easily accomplishable without much difficulty or expense. So making sure doorways are wide enough. If there is some steps, is there a ramp perhaps? That would be an option that you have the space and it's not it's not extremely expensive to do. We also need to accommodate communication requirements. So if there is somebody that cannot hear, what can we do to make sure that they are able to have the same information? Or if they can't see, how can we provide the information? And that's really on the business in order to do that. And there are some creative ways to do that that might be as easy as you have a notebook or a dry erase board that you write some things on. Or there's some tools online like a video able to connect remotely with an interpreter, like a sign language interpreter, for example. So those definitely some things we need to check into. I've received a lot of questions over time about service animals. This falls under the ADA. Service animals are not considered pets. They you have to allow them in your business with a few exceptions. So a service animal though is narrowly defined. It is a dog of any breed or size that are trained to perform a person's task related to a person's disability. They are not required to be certified or professionally trained or wear a vest or other ID. They must be under control of the owner and housebroken. And this does not include dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support. Now, I do know there's service animals of all different kinds. Some do physical things and others pick up on blood sugar issues if a seizure's coming, other things. So sometimes you think this tiny dog, how is that a service animal? But it really is doing an important task. So if if a disability of a person is not obvious, you are allowed to ask only 2 questions to determine if this is really a service dog that you allow on your place. You can ask, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And you can ask, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Nothing beyond that. And, if they're able to answer what the service is, beyond, it's a comfort animal or emotional support animal, the dog has to be trained. And what work or task has it been trained to do, then you deem it a service animal and allow it basically anywhere with some few minor exceptions. The other, maybe relatively unexpected service animal, there's a separate provision in the AD that says there are some miniature horses as service animals. And again, these have been individually trained to do work or perform tasks with peoples with disabilities. And most of the same factors come into play whether you have to allow a miniature horse as a service animal. If this ever happens to you, I want to know about it. Um, Whether the miniature horse is housebroken, make sure it's under the owner's control. The facility has to be able to accommodate the size and the weight of the horse, and make sure that the presence of the horse doesn't compromise the really legitimate safety requirements for others in the facility. ADA also has some information requirements about accessible parking spaces. On their website, there's specifications for the size of those spaces, the width, the slope they can be, the type of surface, access aisles between them, and signage available. And then it gives a minimum number of accessible parking spaces that have to be in the parking lot based on the size of the parking lot. So, for example, if your parking lot has 25 or fewer spaces, I think one of those has to be accessible parking. Something new that we've been hearing about is web content accessibility. And I know Casey, your group and our group is working now because there has been adjustment in the law that government agency web content has to be accessible. So we are going through and learning and doing some things. Excuse me. So the Department of Justice considers web content to be part of what is covered, must be covered under public accommodations for businesses open to the public. And we have learned of some operations who have been sued in other states on this issue. So this is something to take into account. And while again, we don't have time to tell you all about web content accessibility, we're just learning ourselves. There is a session at the PIC Tennessee conference that will talk about this exact topic. One of the folks from the state of Tennessee who's working on the state of Tennessee's content's gonna to speak about that, and Casey helped make that connection. So we're excited to learn more there. So web content accessibility examples includes color contrast. So making sure that text and background, for example, contrast enough that it's easily read about, or and not using color as a the only indicator. So including alternate text on images. So for people who can't see an image, they would have some special technology that would read through the website and it would say there's a picture of whatever you put in that alternate text. As we do videos on social media or websites, putting captions in those videos, we're sending you links to these webinars to get them out quickly, but we're not posting them online yet. We're putting captions on those, and then they will go on our YouTube page. We're using this as a learning opportunity, making sure there's really clear instructions so people understand what they're supposed to do, for example, in an online form, and making sure that there's more than just mouse navigation, that there's keyboard navigation. These are just some of the examples there. I will send these ADA resources to you. The website is really helpful, and they have a primer for small businesses. There's a lot of information about the service animals there. And also there is about an hour-long webinar recording that the National Ag Law Center did relatively recently about the ADA compliance for agritourism specifically. So put that on your list for a cold, rainy day or an evening when you need something to do to dive in a little bit deeper to that. Food service. A lot of agritourism operations are offering concession stands and things. So when people are at the farm, they can purchase food and enjoy that and stick around a little bit longer. So that is like a concession stand or a restaurant or a food truck. And when you're offering those, they are regulated just like a concession stand, restaurant, or food truck anywhere else. Reach out to your local health department and they will get you hooked up with the regulations that you need to follow and the licensing that you need for those things. So check with your local health department. The rules for the state are supposed to be the same, but we have learned there's some interpretations, maybe different in different areas. Um, and if you have any issues with that, please let us know. We've got some contacts at the state office that have been really helpful and helped answer some questions as well. Amusement devices. I would have never thought before a couple of years ago that farms that I work with may have things on them that would need to be regulated like an amusement park. But because of the amusement device regulations that we have in the state, that certainly is the case. So some attractions on farms require annual inspections by a qualified inspector, a certificate of liability insurance, and an itinerary if those attractions are going to travel anywhere off your farm, and a permit. Of course, with fees for the inspector, you're going to pay for your insurance and for the permit. There are also requirements that any incidents, injuries, heaven forbid a death, anything else must be reported in writing to the Department of Labor and Workforce Development within 24 hours of that happening, and cease operation of that device. So what is an amusement device? And once again, there's not a definitive list of everything. But there's this definition. It's a mechanical or structural device that carries or conveys a person or that permits a person to walk along, around, or over a fixed or restricted route or course or within a defined area, including the entrances and exits to the device for the purpose of giving persons amusement, pleasure, thrills, or excitement. That's a whole lot of words, but we have some examples that may apply to some agritourism operations. So tube slides. Some people have the big pipes. I would think that that might be considered a tube slide. Dry slides, which mean just not water slides, that are over 20 feet in height. Inflatable devices. So if you have any of the jumping pillows or jump pads or bounce houses, those fall under this. Trackless trains or any of the barrel trains or other types of it's not transportation, it is a ride. Zip lines, obstacle courses, and we even have some folks with some mechanical carnival devices like the big swings that you would see at a fair or an amusement park. Wagon rides, if I am correct, are considered an amusement device, although a hay ride is listed as an exemption. So I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if you've got to have actual bales of hay or thing on there. Mechanical bull or bungee cord devices are exempt as well. Tim is asking about corn mazes, and if Casey, if you are on here, I have never heard a corn maze considered an amusement device, unless there's something within the corn maze that would be.
Yeah, yeah, Megan, I can comment on that a little bit.
Perfect.
So this is not a hard and fast rule that applies to everything, but a general rule when I spoke with their team was anything that's transporting a person. That's not them physically walking through it. So that they're riding down the slide, they're riding on the hayride, they're traveling down the zip line. If that makes sense, those are more of the things that they're looking at is a device that is moving the person. They're not moving themselves.
Great. And there is some wording related to dark houses or haunted houses, but there's also some exemptions for those. And I think I did read that, if you have a shuttle, maybe you have a parking lot across the road from the main operation and you are shuttling people back and forth, that's not an amusement device. And you certainly want some safety things going on there, but that would not be something that would be inspected and permitted. Is that correct to your recollection, Casey, as well?
Yes, I would think from that specific division, they're not looking at that type of item.
Yeah. Very good. So reach out to the amusement device folks if you have a question, or if you would like us to reach out. Sometimes if we have very specific information, we can reach out and kind of get an answer without putting anybody, um, making them feel uncomfortable from a producer standpoint. And then, if you need to move forward, you could reach out and get with them at that point. Animal exhibitor licenses are something else that come into play. And this is as part of the Animal Welfare Act. So this comes from the standpoint of making sure the animals are safe and cared for and healthy when animals are being exhibited. This is enforced or administered by the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service under animal care licensing. And this also requires inspections and fees if you are required to have this. So this involves having animals that are made available to be seen at the farm or petting zoos or traveling petting zoos. Um, there's some very specific requirements here. So if you're displaying or exhibiting or using only these animals, cows, poultry, goats, pigs, including mini pigs, llamas, alpacas, and their hybrid crosses, domesticated horses, ponies, donkeys, and or their hybrids, or rabbits, those are exempt. So you would not need an animal exhibitor license for that. If you are, a farm that's open and you have cows out in the field grazing and people can see them, that's a traditional farming ag practice, or an art portraying traditional farming and ag settings like nativity scenes, those are also exempt. If you have any sort of animal, but you have 8 or fewer total animals, okay? So you have 8 or fewer mammals or birds at your facility, then you are exempt. That's really small. That's not many animals. They're not really concerned about you at that point. Or if you only participate in exhibits with birds used in falconry, birds used in pigeon races, or bird fancier shows, coursing events, dog races, field trials, such as dog field trial events, horse races, livestock shows, purebred dog and cat shows, rodeos, or state and county fairs, then you are exempt from these. If have about a bunch of cows and goats and sheep and llamas, but then you also have maybe you have a zebra hybrid or you have an animal not on this list, then it is likely that you will need one of these licenses. There is a self-service tool, and I went through lots of different combinations of these to help get those exceptions. You can go on their website and follow the prompts and answer the questions about what you're thinking about doing or what you do. And that will help you determine if you need an exhibitor license or some other license they have and whether you need to register under that. It does require an inspector will come out and they are looking for things that are going to make that animal safe and comfortable and healthy. And then there's a licensing fee for that. Thank you, Casey. Those are great links in there and very helpful. So again, our time is almost up, and you can see we have covered. Well, they were not listed right as those animals, so they would certainly require. Um, I think that if you answered those questions, it would tell you you probably need a license and to connect them. I will say, um, this has been a long time ago, but there were peacocks loose at a farm, and a child had an incident. I believe that the child was not leaving the peacock alone. However, there was a pretty serious injury with a peacock. They're not really a domesticated um, animal, so to speak. So, and certainly emus. Yeah. And again, this law is not about keeping people safe, but about keeping the animals safe. So I don't think that that applies I, to the exemption. I think you would require those there. Good question. So I hope this has given you, an awareness of, wow, there's a lot of potential regulations out there. And but there's a lot of resources and information, and we just need to try to identify which regulations apply to our businesses and what we need to do to comply with those, and how that needs to work into our business plan, and how that can work into, your costs of management and things there. Tim, yes, what a fabulous segue. So, on Monday, we will be talking about risk assessment and management, including what I think you're referring to as agritourism liability, in addition to the resources for your farm that you're not going to want to miss either, because Casey has some great resources in her office, and there's some other resources from the state, and I'll mention a few from Extension and other places as well. So that will be on Monday. And then Wednesday, we have two agritourism operators that are going to share about their operations and lessons learned, and let you ask questions. So that will be a good opportunity as well. And we'll have a special announcement about an additional educational opportunity for you on that day as well. Thank you all for joining us today. I will hang around and watch the chat and try to answer any more questions either in the chat or out loud. Please remember to take time to complete the feedback form for this session, which also records your attendance for TAEP if you're interested in that educational credit. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your participation in the chat. Your questions and comments help so much. And thank you to Shelby and Kortni and Casey for adding some links in there as well. So very fine about that. Okay, this is a good question, and I wish I had a better answer. Are buildings or structures that are used as a roadside stand or market subject to building codes and fire marshal regulations? Um, I think it may depend a little bit. It, are people going into the building or the structure? Are there going to be, people shopping inside? Or is it, like a little cover that like a farmer's market tent would be, for example, where they're not really going inside. Even if there's not sides on it, it may fall into needing some of that because people will actually be inside. Um, it may also depend a little bit on what you're selling in there. I don't know that that's the case, but are you only selling, what you grew or raised, or are you selling, um, you know, breads and cakes and things made from things that you didn't grow or raise? Um, yeah, that's a good thing. Hmm. I think people are enforcing that too, mostly from a safety standpoint. And that it's not necessarily an agriculture building, right? It's not the shop where you're fixing your tractors. It's not the barn where your livestock are, um, or the shed where you're storing your product before it goes to, um, yes. So all of that would be into building codes, and probably requiring an architect drawing, um, and all of that. Yeah, and I don't know, this is not this is not something where I have an absolute complete understanding of, and there's going to be interpretations differently. Um, okay, good. That's what is happening in Wilson County. Okay, so if you can go inside, it's one set of rules versus if it's just covering outside. Yeah, that makes sense. Just from a public safety standpoint and you know, are people actually going in versus very good. Thank you all so much. We'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend.